Welcome to the NC Spin After Spin. Additional comments from our panelists just available on our website. I want to ask all of you, what do you wish you had said on last week's show but didn't say? Chris Fitzsimon, we'll start with you.
Well, we talked about the controversy over the cuts to education and the campaign issue between Speaker Tillis and Senator Hagan. I think we talk often on this show about sometimes ads reinforce something that's already a perception. I think the problem wasn't necessarily the finite budget cuts that were made or weren't made. It's the perception, I think is accurate, but others may argue, is that the General Assembly for 3 years wasn't supportive of public education. Governor McCrory ran for office saying our schools are broken. We heard rhetoric about government monopoly schools are failing our kids. The Teachers Association, whether you like them or not, was pilloried by Speaker Tillis. It was a midnight session to take away their checkoff dues. All these things added up to a perception that the Republican General Assembly doesn't support public schools. That's why these ads have worked.
Rufus, what would you have said that you didn't get a chance to say?
I wish I had talked more about how bad the Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, is. It's turned campaigns into nothing more than ads that destroy your character. It's making people do everything your mother told you not to do. You talk ugly about people. You call people names. And the elections are being stolen from the American people by a few oligarchs in the country on both sides of the aisle. And I would like to call for the American people to rise up and call for a constitutional convention among the states, because it'll never pass the Congress. The most terrible decision since the one that let one human being enslave another.
All right. Becky, what do you wish you'd said?
Well, when we were talking about Medicaid, one of the points that I had hoped to make was that when we were talking about Medicaid expansion, particularly, and reforms that the General Assembly is looking at, we still have tremendous problems within Medicaid. We ought to get those straightened out and those reforms in place before we even think about expanding a program that we can hardly manage now. And one of the things that I think North Carolina should look at is doing a Medicaid eligibility audit. Many states, well, some states have done that. It's kind of spreading across the country, to go in there and do a real comprehensive audit to figure out whether the people who need to be receiving those services on Medicaid are actually the people who qualify for those. Illinois did one recently and found thousands of people receiving Medicaid who were dead, who actually had applied for Medicaid after they had died. Cleaned a lot of that up.
Did they also vote?
Probably, we're talking Illinois, so yeah, probably. So I think that's probably a given. Now, granted, that's Illinois, but I think there's some lessons there for every state that if we're going to even consider Medicaid expansion, if we're going to look at reforms that will ensure that the people who need those services are getting them and that taxpayers' money is spent properly.
John Hood, what do you wish you'd said?
Chris makes the argument that the perception of education funding is more important maybe than the specific numbers, and I think he's right, though, for a different reason. One of the reasons why there's a gap between the actual numbers, which show an increase, not a gigantic increase, but an increase in funding, and people's perception of it, is that some of that, maybe a lot of that increase, went to teacher salaries in 2012 and 2014 and to teacher benefits in all 4 years. It's not evident how the classroom is affected when you, for example, save the state employee health plan from going up on co-pays or otherwise cutting back on the pension contribution for teachers. Now, if in fact the legislature had stinted on pension contributions and increased the employee share of health care coverage in order to, for example, fund textbooks, they would have been attacked for hurting teachers. So it's not, I mean, some of this is politics, but you can understand why people may not perceive the spending on teacher salary and compensation as directly affecting the classroom as, for example, textbooks.
As somebody said, it's complicated. Thanks for watching the After Spin. More video all during the week on ncspin.com.